My ex-wife and her judge husband stole my children. Then her sister showed up with evidence. I, 32M, never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after everything that happened last week, I need to get this off my chest. 5 years ago, my life was completely different. I had a stable job in IT, a house in the suburbs, and most importantly, I got to see my kids, 7M and 9F, every single day. Now, I'm lucky if I get to talk to them on the phone once a month. It all started when my ex-wife filed for divorce. The initial separation was surprisingly civil. We agreed to joint custody, split our assets fairly, and promised to put the kids first. Looking back, I should have known it was too good to be true. Everything changed when she started dating again. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. Our kids seemed to like her new boyfriend, and he appeared to be a decent guy. What I didn't know then was that he was a county judge. I only found out when they got married 6 months later, in a rushed ceremony that neither the kids nor I were invited to. That's when the nightmare began. Suddenly, every custody agreement we had was being challenged. Emergency hearings were scheduled at impossible times when I couldn't get off work. My lawyer seemed helpless, watching as motion after motion was filed against me. Each time I went to court, I faced a different judge who happened to be a close friend of my ex's new husband. The accusations started small, missed pickup times, sending the kids to school in inappropriate clothes. Then they escalated. I was accused of being unstable, of drinking, and eventually of being emotionally manipulative toward the kids. Every time I tried to defend myself, it somehow made things worse. Within 8 months, I lost primary custody. Then my visitation rights were restricted to supervised visits only. Finally, they were suspended altogether pending a psychological evaluation, which conveniently kept getting delayed or rescheduled. I spent every penny I had fighting this. I switched lawyers 3 times, but it didn't matter. In our small county, nobody wanted to go up against a judge. I watched helplessly as my ex-wife's new husband adopted my children, despite my explicit objections. The day I got that final order, I honestly considered ending it all, but then something unexpected happened. My ex-wife's sister reached out to me through a mutual friend. She had been watching everything unfold and couldn't stay quiet anymore. She had evidence, texts, emails, recordings of conversations, showing how they had planned this from the beginning, how they had deliberately waited to get married until they had gathered enough evidence against me, how they had coordinated with other judges to ensure their plans would work. For the first time in years, I had hope, but I also knew I had to be careful. These people had already proven how powerful they were, how easily they could destroy someone's life. I spent months working with a legal advocacy group, building a case quietly. We gathered more evidence, found other cases where similar things had happened, and waited for the right moment. Last week, my ex-wife's sister finally testified before the State Judicial Review Board. She brought everything, every piece of evidence, every recording, every email. The look on my ex-wife's face when her own sister walked into that hearing room. I'll never forget it. The hearing lasted for 3 days. My ex-wife's sister brought forward more evidence than we'd initially expected. Turns out she'd been documenting everything since the day her sister met the judge at a charity fundraiser. She had text messages where my ex openly discussed their plan to make me disappear from the kids' lives. There were emails between judges discussing how to handle my case, even before any custody disputes were filed. But what really broke me were the recordings. My ex-wife's sister had recorded conversations where they laughed about how easy it was to manipulate the system. In one recording, my ex's husband bragged about how he'd called in favors to get specific judges assigned to our hearings. They even discussed coaching my kids to say certain things during their court-mandated interviews. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. The judicial assistant who had worked for my ex's husband came forward. She had documentation of cases being reassigned, dates being manipulated, and records being altered. She testified about how they would schedule hearings at times they knew I couldn't attend, then use my absence against me. During the hearing, I learned things that made my blood boil. They had intentionally scheduled my supervised visits at a facility 2 hours away, knowing I couldn't make that drive regularly with my work schedule. Then they used my inconsistent visitation as evidence that I was an uninvolved parent. They had even gone as far as reporting me to CPS multiple times with false allegations, timing it perfectly with my custody hearings. My ex-wife's reaction to all this was telling. She sat there, stone-faced, occasionally whispering to her husband. But when her sister revealed that she had videos of my ex coaching our kids before their court interviews, something changed. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. The videos were heartbreaking. In one, you could hear my ex telling our daughter exactly what to say about me, making her practice until she got it right. Another showed my son crying, saying he didn't want to lie about me, while my ex told him he had to protect their new family. My ex's husband tried to maintain his composure, but you could see him crumbling as more evidence came out. Other court employees started coming forward, describing how he'd pressured them to mishandle documents related to my case. A clerk testified about being threatened with termination if she didn't lose certain filings I'd submitted. By the second day, local media had caught wind of the story. Reporters were outside the courthouse, and suddenly, other families started coming forward with similar stories. It turned out we weren't the only ones. 3 other fathers had lost custody of their children under suspicious circumstances, all involving the same group of judges. The State Bar Association launched their own investigation. More judges were being implicated, and the web of corruption kept growing. What had started as my personal nightmare was turning into a full-blown scandal that threatened to expose years of judicial misconduct. On the 3rd day, my ex-wife finally broke. Maybe it was the pressure, or maybe she couldn't keep up the act anymore. She requested to speak privately with the review board. When she came out 2 hours later, her face was streaked with tears. Her husband wasn't with her. I later learned he had been served with papers right there in the building. Both criminal charges and a federal investigation were pending. The aftermath of the hearing hit like a tsunami. Within days, my ex's husband was suspended from the bench pending investigation. 5 other judges were placed under review. The FBI got involved, investigating what they called a systematic corruption of the family court system. My ex-wife's sister was placed under protective custody after receiving threats, but all I cared about was seeing my kids again. The review board immediately suspended all orders related to my custody case. My lawyer filed for emergency reinstatement of my parental rights. Still, I knew we had to move carefully. My kids had been through enough trauma. I didn't want to make it worse by rushing in. The hardest part was learning what my kids had been through. During their interviews with child services, they revealed how they'd been pressured and manipulated. My daughter talked about being scared to say she missed me. My son admitted he'd been told that if he showed too much excitement during our supervised visits, they'd be stopped completely. My ex-wife's breakdown turned out to be a full confession. She admitted everything. How they'd planned it from the start, how her husband had promised to handle everything if she helped him build a case against me. She revealed that they'd chosen me as a target because I was perfect, stable job, no criminal record, well-documented sobriety. If they could destroy me in court, they could do it to anyone. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. My ex was facing criminal charges for perjury and witness tampering. Her husband and 3 other judges were indicted on federal charges. The state Supreme Court appointed a special master to review every custody case these judges had handled in the past 5 years. But the real work was with my kids. We started with supervised reunification therapy, not because anyone thought I was a danger, but because the therapist wanted to help us rebuild our relationship carefully. My daughter was angry at first, not at me, but at herself for believing the lies. My son was quieter, but he would hold my hands so tight during our sessions that his knuckles would turn white. The healing process is ongoing. We've moved to a different county, where nobody knows our story. My kids are in therapy, and so am I. We're learning how to be a family again. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes my daughter still gets scared that someone will take me away again. My son has nightmares about the court interviews. Last week, we had our first overnight visit. Making pancakes together the next morning, my daughter asked if I'd ever given up hope of getting them back. I told her the truth, that there were dark days when I nearly did, but thinking of them always pulled me back. She hugged me and said she'd never stop loving me, even when she was told she had to pretend she didn't. The legal battle isn't over. The federal investigation is still ongoing, and more families are coming forward every week. My ex-wife's sister has become an advocate for family court reform, working with legal organizations to prevent this from happening to other families. As for my ex, she's agreed to plead guilty in exchange for her testimony against the others involved. But right now, none of that matters as much as the small victories, like helping with homework, attending school events, or just being able to tuck my kids into bed at night. We're building new memories to replace the years we lost. It's not perfect, and we all carry scars from what happened, but we're together. And this time, no one can take that away from us.